In the spring of 1200 BC, a young girl named Nefertari stood in the courtyard of the temple of Ammon at Karnak, while a group of priests carefully shaved her head until every strand of hair was gone. She was only 9 years old. Her father, a low-ranking official, had brought her to the temple 3 days earlier. He owed the temple a debt that he could not repay in grain or silver, so he settled it with his own child. Nefertari did not fully understand what was happening. Her father told her she was receiving a great honor, that she would serve the gods, and should be proud and obedient. But when the cold bronze razor scraped across her scalp, removing the long black braids she once wore proudly, Nefertari began to cry. An older priestess struck her across the face. "Servants of the god do not cry," the woman said sharply. "You have no tears left, no name left. You belong to Ammon now, and Ammon does not tolerate weakness." That moment marked the beginning of Nefertari's new existence. A life that would last 43 years. A life built on confinement, control, and systematic exploitation, hidden behind walls painted with scenes of divine perfection. She would never leave the temple again, never marry, never own property, and never decide what happened to her body or her future. But here is what most people never realize. Nefertari was not alone. She was one of thousands of girls and women who lived and died inside Egypt's temples, dressed in purity, but trapped in servitude. They carried titles that sounded sacred: wives of the god, servants of the god, hands of the goddess, the pure ones. But behind those beautiful names was a system that destroyed lives. This is the truth the hieroglyphs will never tell you, and what follows is not myth. It is documented in papyri, temple archives, and ancient records. It is the story of how religious power can be twisted to control and exploit the vulnerable. If you want to uncover the darkest corners of human history, help this channel grow, hit like and subscribe, because what follows is far darker than you imagine. When people hear about temple virgins of Egypt, they picture elegant women in white linen serving gods with grace, but the truth was nothing sacred. These women were prisoners behind holy walls. From the moment they entered, their names, their hair, and their freedom were taken. Most never chose this path. They were children offered to temples as payments for debts or gifts to gain divine favor. Once given, they never returned. Temples owned lands, collected taxes, and when a family failed to pay, they handed over their daughters. It was slavery disguised as devotion. One of them was Nefertari, only 9 years old. Her father could not pay the temple what he owed, so he brought her to the priests. They shaved her head, removed her clothes, and called it purification. The freezing water stung her skin as the priests examined her under the name of ritual. One whispered that the gods were watching, testing her obedience. That moment became her first violation. Far away in Nubia, another child named Mutmoya was taken when soldiers came collecting tribute, gold, grain, ivory, and children. She was tied with 12 others and forced to march north for weeks. Her tears dried before she reached Thebes. There she was given to the temple of Mut, goddess of motherhood, a cruel irony for a child who would never be a mother herself. Inside those temples, rituals turned girls into property. Their hair was shaved to erase beauty, their names replaced to erase identity. Each ceremony broke them a little more until they no longer remembered who they were. When Nefertari looked into a bronze mirror, she could not recognize herself. The reflection staring back was no longer a child, it was a servant molded by fear, silence, and obedience. And this was only the beginning. What came next inside those sacred walls would show just how far the priests were willing to go to maintain their so-called purity. The priests gave her a new identity, names like Beloved of Ammon or Hand of the Goddess. Nefertari became Nefert Nebet, meaning beautiful is the lady, forbidden ever to speak her true name again. That renaming killed her old self. She was no longer her father's daughter but property of the gods. Then came the darkest rite, the divine marriage. Each girl was symbolically wedded to the deity she would serve, a ritual presented as sacred honor. At 10, Muya was dressed in fine white linen, jeweled and trembling, led before the towering figure of the goddess Mut. The priest's chant claimed the goddess spoke through him. Muya repeated the vows that gave away her body and life forever. The temple called it holy. In truth, it was ownership disguised as faith. A bride of the god could never marry or bear free children. Inside the temple, every breath was controlled. Nefertari's day began before dawn in a crowded dormitory. Privacy did not exist. They washed, dressed in linen robes, and began endless labor, weaving, grinding, cleaning, acts of worship masking servitude. Silence ruled. To speak without permission meant punishment. Nefertari's only friend, Takayet, once whispered to her. The overseer caught them and beat her. Takayet vanished soon after, declared impure and returned to the gods. Everyone knew what that meant. Surveillance was constant. No contact with families, no escape. Inspections for ritual purity became violations repeated until the women learned to leave their minds behind. Resistance brought starvation or beatings. The priests called obedience a virtue, twisting faith into a tool of control. They taught the women that their bodies were temples and priests had divine right to enter them. Mutamuya, the Nubian girl, still remembered her mother's songs. One night she hummed softly. An older woman reported her. The next morning, she was dragged before the high priest. He struck her across the face, and the chamber fell silent. That blow was a warning to all. The gods demanded silence, and the priests would enforce it. He told her she had no mother, no tongue but that of the gods, no memories except those given to her. Locked for 7 days, something inside her died. She never sang again. Among the temple women, some were called wives of the god. They took part in sacred unions meant to ensure Egypt's fertility, but beneath divine poetry hid horror. High priests claimed to embody the gods, dressing in sacred robes, and declaring their acts divine. The chosen women were warned that refusal meant blasphemy. What followed were not holy unions but violations disguised as ritual. At 14, Nefertari faced her first sacred union. Led into the incense-filled sanctuary, she froze as the masked priest reached for her. Fear and indoctrination kept her still. The ritual was recorded as a success, but she knew it was defilement wrapped in ceremony. Many women suffered the same fate, some bearing children who were taken to serve the same system. When Nefertari's daughter was born, she cared for her briefly before the temple claimed her. Seeing her child endure the same breaking was the cruelest punishment of all. Those who resisted met terror. One woman, Renutma, shouted that the priests were not gods. Dragged into the desert, she was left to die under the sun. The next day, her body was shown as a warning. Her courage taught others to resist silently, through coded songs, hidden words, and weaving patterns that whispered "I resist." Most temple women lived and died unseen, buried in nameless graves. Nefertari died at 52, her body tossed into a pit. Her daughter, forbidden to mourn, was told to forget she ever existed. Yet some refused to vanish. On stone fragments, they carved defiant messages. One read, "I was born free, they took that from me." Another, by Mutamuya, a Nubian girl, declared, "I came from beyond the first waterfall. My mother's name was Manitori. I remember her voice. I never forgot who I was." These voices, carved in secret, still whisper the truth temples tried to erase. Thousands of women taken as children, exploited for decades, erased in death. Tourists admire those walls, never seeing the suffering within, but now you know behind every painted god was a silenced woman who once lived, fought, and remembered. Temples still stand, the stones still remember, and now you do.